I'm an attorney and also a Stoneleigh Center fellow. Stoneleigh Center is a foundation in Philadelphia. They've awarded about 12 fellowships over the past 3 years, looking at the intersection of the child welfare, juvenile justice, and education systems. I also work with the Pennsylvania Bar Association. I work closely with David Travaskis, who is their law and education person, and I noticed in your report there was a reference in the education section to the work of the Pennsylvania Bar Association and Mr. Travaskis. He's been enormously supportive of my work, and I hope to continue working with him in the future. I wanted to address the school-to-prison pipeline first. It's kind of an ugly term, doesn't make us feel good, doesn't do what schools are supposed to do. They're supposed to turn us into highly functioning adults, not put us in jail. However, I read a report a few years ago by the Chester Upland School District Superintendent, which was submitted to the Department of Education, and she used the phrase school-to-prison pipeline. And I decided if she could use it, I guess I can use it too. And she basically said that 5% of her graduating students went to prison and 6% went to college. That was a terrible, terrible thing for me to read and for me to think about. I think that many students are turned off by curriculum. They see it as irrelevant. And they're turned out by schools' zero-tolerance codes. They're then vulnerable youth facing the dangerous streets of inner-city communities, lacking family and school support. Academic failure, truancy, and dropping out of school predict adult criminal behavior. There was a study about 10 years ago that showed that 20% of boys with poor elementary school performance were convicted of violent offenses as adults. In addition, a 2008 Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency report stated that even if Pennsylvania spent $700 million building 3 more prisons, the prison overcrowding situation would be worse in 2013 than it was in 2008. And I remember when I read that the first time, I thought to myself, how can this be happening? In 1980, and I believe Representative Waters made reference to this fact just a moment ago, there were 8,000 inmates in Pennsylvania state prisons. I believe he said it's 52,000, so I guess I'm not up on my numbers here, but I know that it exceeds 51,000. In an era of reduced public revenue, a better way has to be found to help our youth. Student-operated youth courts promote listening to the student's voice. Much of what went wrong in Luzerne County occurred because nobody was listening to the stories of the juvenile offenders. Youth courts give students a voice, both the respondents, the offenders, and also the student volunteers that run the court, like Brian and Jamar here. Instead of viewing students as the problem, we see them as the primary resource in a school youth court. The Chester Youth Court motto, which they came up with, we had no input into this at all, but I love it, is students helping students make better decisions. And I think that's what we want from all of our kids. In 2007, the school district received a service learning grant to reduce the high rate of truancy at Chester High School. A survey was conducted asking students why the truancy rate was so high, and of course truancy is just one of the first steps of going in the wrong direction as you're growing up. The students gave 3 reasons for the high truancy rates at Chester High School. The curriculum was irrelevant to their lives, family issues, taking care of parents, grandparents, children, siblings, etc. And third, inconsistent discipline within the school itself. They decided to use their grant to create a youth court to deal with the inconsistent school discipline because they thought they couldn't have any impact on the first 2 causes of truancy. We handle truancy cases in the youth court. We also handle hall walking, that's not being in where you're supposed to be during school hours, profanity, disruption, dress code, and cell phone violations. Youth courts are peer justice disciplinary systems which capitalize on the fact that many youth value the opinion of their peers far more than they value our opinion. They operate on the principle of positive peer pressure. Just as negative peer pressure encourages bad behavior, positive peer pressure contributes to improved conduct. And one of the neatest things that our students did, I thought, was the very first hearing, the very first year, as they were announcing their very first verdict, they all stood up together as they faced the respondent, and they told that respondent what he or she was going to have to do. And I've never actually asked them whether they did that just automatically or whether they had talked about doing it, but I think it addresses the issue of a lot of people are worried that youth courts won't work because Saturday night in an alley there's going to be retribution paid. And I've had that asked of me by a lot of people over a lot of years. And nationally, we've never found anybody that I've talked to in youth court where that has ever happened. But I think in Chester it was kind of effective that the students stand up together. So when you're read the disposition, you know there's 6 or 9 other people that feel that way. It's not just 1 or 2. We also think that youth courts are a platform for youth development, and that's the particular area that I'm trying to develop in Chester. You've got the kids. You've got the kids that have done something wrong. They made a bad decision. They're not a criminal yet, but they're going in the wrong direction. And you now have the chance through clever dispositions. And the students spend time debating on what does this student need to see, what does this student need to hear, what does this student need to do to turn their behavior around. So you have a chance to actually administer corrective action as part of the disciplinary system. We follow the principles of restorative justice. These two understand restorative justice better than I do, and they talk the talk. They tell students as they're administering the sentence, we're not trying to punish you. We just don't want you to do it again. You know, what can we do to help you? That's a routine question in the youth court. I've basically trained students for 3 years to run a youth court in Chester. We teach them legal concepts, we teach them court procedures. It takes between 8 and 15 hours, roughly. And that's consistent with what they'll tell you at the national level. You can do it a lot quicker. You could do it you could take a lot more time and be more detailed. But basically, you can have students ready to run a youth court in about 12 to 15 hours, in my opinion, and run it well. We've had judges come in and see our youth court and be very impressed by the performance of these students. Youth courts result in improved self-confidence, public speaking, and teamwork competencies by youth court members. They're going to use these skills the rest of their lives. The things they're learning in our youth court, they're going to use the rest of their lives. They've also learned to have a respect for the rule of law, the consequences of breaking rules, and taking responsibility for their own actions. One student told me that youth court was the most challenging thing that he did every day, and he had to stay after school to experience youth court. Youth courts are relatively affordable. If you run them as part of a social studies department in a high school, there's almost no cost at all. Nationally, they'll tell you that the juvenile justice-based youth courts, the one that are part of the juvenile justice system, the average cost is $40,000. But I frankly think they can be done much less expensive than that.